I didn't come to Alaska looking for trouble. I came to get away from it. My life before this. A mess. A wife who cheated, friends who weren't really friends, a world that seemed determined to spit in my face. So, I left it all behind. Now, I live in a small fishing town, spending my days chopping wood, fixing up my cabin and keeping to myself. Most people here leave me alone. They know I'm the guy who showed up out of nowhere last year, the one who buys supplies but never stays to chat. Fine by me. The less talking, the better. I didn't need friends anymore. Friends lie. Friends betray. But then Amber fell into the water. It was supposed to be a simple supply run. I was docked near the general store, loading up gas and canned goods when I heard a scream. I turned to see a young woman, maybe early 20s, slipping off the dock, her body plunging straight into the icy water. Without thinking, I jumped in after her. It was freezing, the kind of cold that makes your body seize up instantly. But she was panicking, flailing, sinking. I grabbed her, pulling her up, my own muscles stiff and aching as I swam us both back toward my boat. By the time I got her on board, she was shivering violently, lips turning blue. I wrapped her in my coat and sat her near the small heater inside the cabin. Breathe slow, I told her, rubbing her arms to warm her up. Her eyes were wide, scared. Thank you, she stammered. I nodded, not really in the mood for conversation. Then voices. Amber. A man and woman came running down the dock, looking frantic. I stepped aside as they climbed onto my boat, the woman immediately wrapping Amber in a hug. Are you okay? What happened? She pulled me out, Amber said, looking at me with something almost like admiration. I would have drowned. The man turned to me. You saved my daughter. I shrugged. She got lucky. If she'd fallen a little farther from the dock, I might not have reached her in time. The woman turned to Amber, scolding her. I told you not to get so close to the edge. Amber ignored her, still looking at me. What's your name? Doesn't matter, I said, standing up. You should get dry. But something in Amber's expression made me uneasy. The way she looked at me, like she had just met someone important. Like she wasn't planning to forget this anytime soon. And that was the last thing I needed. I figured that was the end of it. Pulled a girl out of the water, saved her life and went back to my quiet existence. No big deal. But things never go the way you want them to. A few days later I was in town again, picking up some nails and rope for a project back at my cabin. The general store wasn't crowded, just the usual locals grabbing supplies. That's when I heard someone say my name. Hey! You're the one who saved me. I turned and saw Amber standing there, smiling like we were old friends. She had long, light brown hair tied back in a braid and a bright look in her eyes, too bright, too curious. I gave her a nod. You all right? Yeah. Thanks to you. She hesitated. You never told me your name. I didn't really want to. The less people knew about me, the better. Doesn't matter, I said again, moving to grab my things. She frowned but didn't back off. You live out by the lake, right? In that cabin. I stopped. How do you know that? My dad told me. He said you keep to yourself. People in town say you're some kind of mystery. Great. Exactly what I didn't want. I sighed. I just like my peace and quiet. She grinned. Well, that's boring. You should come have dinner with us. My parents want to thank you properly. No need, I said, shaking my head. I didn't do it for a reward. She rolled her eyes. It's not a reward. It's just dinner. You have to eat, right? I didn't answer. I was already heading for the counter to pay, hoping she'd take the hint. But she didn't. As I walked back to my boat, she followed. You don't talk much, do you? Nope. Well, that's okay. I talk enough for both of us. She flashed a grin like that was supposed to be charming. So, what brought you out here? I stopped walking and turned to her. Look, Amber, I appreciate the invite, but I'm not looking to make friends. That should have been enough. Any normal person would take that and walk away. But not Amber. She just tilted her head, studying me. Did something happen to you? She asked. My stomach clenched. I didn't let it show, but something about the way she asked made me uneasy. Like she could see past the walls I'd built. I scoffed. Why do you care? She shrugged. I don't know. You just seem like you're carrying something heavy. I turned away, stepping onto my boat. Forget it. She didn't push anymore, just watched as I started the engine. But as I pulled away, I could see her still standing there, watching me like she wasn't going to give up that easily. And something told me this girl was going to be a problem. I thought after that little talk Amber would get the hint. But nope. The next morning, just as I was finishing up chopping wood behind my cabin, I heard footsteps crunching in the snow. I turned and there she was. Standing in my yard like she belonged there. I rested the axe on my shoulder, staring at her. How'd you find this place? She grinned like she was proud of herself. Small town. Not hard. I sighed. What do you want, Amber? I brought food. She held up a basket. My mom made a roast and I figured you don't cook much. I frowned. I cook fine. She laughed. Okay, Mr. Lone Wolf. She walked past me like she was invited and sat right down on my porch. But since I'm already here, you might as well eat. I could have told her to leave. I probably should have. But the smell coming from that basket was too good to ignore, and I hadn't had a real home-cooked meal in a long time. So, against my better judgment, I sat down. She handed me a plate and for a few minutes we ate in silence. She didn't pry, didn't talk too much, just sat there watching the trees. It almost felt normal. Almost. Then she spoke. So, what did she do to you? I stopped mid-bite, my whole body tensing. She didn't look at me, just kept staring at the trees. I mean, it's obvious. You're hiding from something. Or someone. I set my plate down. Amber. She finally turned to me, her eyes serious. You don't have to tell me. But I think you should talk to someone. I let out a bitter laugh. You think talking fixes things? Sometimes. She shrugged. Not always. But keeping it all inside. That never works. I looked away, my jaw tight. I wasn't about to dump my whole life story on some girl I barely knew. She sighed, standing up. All right, I'll back off. For now. She smiled, but it wasn't teasing this time. It was understanding. But I'm not going anywhere. I didn't answer. Just watched as she grabbed the empty plates, put them back in the basket, and started walking toward the trees. Halfway there, she turned back. By the way, I like your cabin. Then she was gone. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the spot where she disappeared. I should have been annoyed. Should have been mad that she wouldn't leave me alone. But instead, all I felt was uneasy. Because she was right. I was hiding. And no matter how far I ran, I couldn't outrun my past forever. For a while, things went quiet. No surprise visits from Amber, no random conversations in town. I figured she'd finally lost interest. Good. I went back to my routine, fishing, chopping wood, keeping to myself. But even as I tried to focus on my quiet life, something about our last conversation stuck with me. What did she do to you? I hadn't thought about my wife in weeks. I'd forced myself not to. But Amber's words brought it all back. The way my wife, Claire, used to look at me, like I was everything to her. The way she laughed, the way she kissed me like I was the only man in the world. And then the way she lied. The way she acted like I was crazy when I started noticing things. Late nights, secret texts, a distance that wasn't there before. And then the words that shattered everything. You can't control me. I'll dance, cheat, and live however I want. I gripped the railing of my porch, forcing the memory away. She wasn't here. She wasn't my problem anymore. Or so I thought. Because 2 days later I got a call. I almost didn't answer. The only people who ever called were the supply store and the old guy who ran the docks. But when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. Claire. I stared at the name, my pulse pounding. After everything, after all this time, what could she possibly want? The phone rang and rang. I should have ignored it. But some part of me, the part that still wanted answers, hit accept. I didn't speak first. Neither did she. For a few seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then her voice, soft, almost nervous. "Hey." I clenched my jaw. "What do you want?" She exhaled. I heard you moved. To Alaska." I said nothing. I wanted to talk." I let out a bitter laugh. "Now you want to talk?" She hesitated. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I repeated, gripping the phone tighter. "Is that what you call it?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was shaky. "I'm sorry." Sorry. That word meant nothing to me anymore. "Why are you calling, Claire?" Another pause. Then she whispered, "Can we meet?" I felt my stomach twist. She wanted to see me. After everything. After the lies, after breaking me into pieces. I should have told her to go to hell. Should have hung up right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I asked the question I knew I'd regret. When? I don't know why I agreed to meet her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was anger. Or maybe some part of me still wanted to look her in the eye and ask why. Whatever it was, I told her to meet me in town at the little diner near the docks. Neutral ground. I wasn't about to let her anywhere near my home. The whole day I tried to act normal, chopping wood, checking my fishing lines, fixing a broken part of my boat. But my hands were unsteady, my mind restless. I kept replaying that last fight in my head. The way she stood there, arms crossed, smirking like I was some idiot for thinking marriage meant loyalty. "You can't control me. I'll dance, cheat, and live however I want." I gritted my teeth, gripping the hammer so tight my knuckles went white. Why the hell was I even giving her this chance? The sky darkened as I made my way into town, heavy clouds rolling in over the water. A storm was coming and the air had that sharp electric feeling. Fitting. When I got to the diner, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, stirring a cup of coffee, looking almost nervous. Good. She should be. I walked over and sat across from her without a word. She looked up and for a second I saw something in her eyes. Guilt? Regret? Hard to tell. "Hey," she said softly. I didn't answer. Just leaned back in the booth, crossing my arms. "Say what you need to say." She swallowed. I know I don't deserve this. But I needed to see you." I scoffed. "Why? To tell me more lies?" She flinched. "I didn't call to fight." "Then why did you call, Claire?" My voice was cold, sharper than I expected. She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "I messed up," she said finally. "I thought I wanted freedom, excitement. I thought, I don't know, that you'd always be there no matter what I did." I let out a bitter laugh. "You thought you could cheat on me and I'd just stay?" She shut her eyes for a second. "I was stupid." "Yeah," I muttered. "You were." Silence stretched between us. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the diner windows. Rain started pattering against the glass. Claire took a shaky breath. "I'm getting divorced." I blinked. "Excuse me." She gave a hollow laugh. "Guess I got a taste of my own medicine." "The guy I left you for? He cheated on me. Lied to me just like I lied to you." I stared at her, waiting for the satisfaction to hit. It didn't. She sniffed, rubbing her arms like she was cold. "I deserved it. I know that. But, when it happened, the only person I wanted to talk to was you." I clenched my jaw. "Too bad for you, then." She looked up, eyes pleading. I need to know. Do you hate me?" I didn't answer right away. Did I? The anger was still there, the betrayal burned deep. But hate? I wasn't sure. I exhaled slowly. "I don't think about you enough to hate you." That one hit her. I saw it in her face, the way she bit her lip, holding back whatever she wanted to say. I stood up, throwing a few bills on the table for my untouched coffee. We're done here. She grabbed my wrist, desperate. Wait. Please. I yanked away. Don't call me again, Claire. Then I walked out into the storm, letting the rain wash away whatever part of me still cared. The rain poured as I walked back to my boat, soaking through my jacket in seconds. I didn't care. My head was too full of noise, Claire's voice, her stupid excuses, the way she looked at me like she still had a right to my time. I should have felt closure. Should have felt like I won. She got what she deserved. But instead I just felt tired. As I untied my boat from the dock, I heard footsteps behind me. For a second I thought Claire had followed me, but when I turned it was Amber. Of course. She stood under the awning of the bait shop, arms crossed, eyes sharp. So that was your wife? I sighed, running a hand through my wet hair. Not anymore. She stepped closer. I saw you two in the diner. Spying? I asked, climbing onto my boat. Amber shrugged. It's a small town. I ignored that and started the engine. But Amber didn't move. She just stood there, watching me like she was debating something. Then she asked, "You okay?" I let out a short laugh. "Why do you care?" She tilted her head. "Because I think you pretend you don't need people, but you do." I gripped the wheel, my jaw tightening. "Amber, go home." She didn't. Instead, she walked right up to the boat, gripping the railing. "She still has a hold on you, doesn't she?" That hit harder than I wanted it to. I looked away, staring at the dark water. "Doesn't matter." "Yeah," she said quietly. "It does." The wind howled, rocking the boat slightly. Amber shivered but didn't back away. I sighed. "Go inside before you freeze." She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But if you ever want to talk, you know where to find me." With that, she turned and walked back into town, disappearing into the rain. I watched her go, a strange feeling twisting in my chest. Then I shook it off and steered my boat into the storm, hoping the waves could drown out the past. I got back to my cabin drenched, cold, and pissed off. The rain had slowed, but the wind still howled through the trees, rattling the windows. I peeled off my wet clothes, threw some logs into the fireplace, and sat down with a bottle of whiskey. I wasn't a heavy drinker, but tonight felt like an exception. Claire's voice still echoed in my head. "Do you hate me?" I should. I wanted to. But mostly I just hated what she'd turned me into. A man who ran. A man who couldn't trust. I took a long sip, staring into the fire. Then a knock at the door. I frowned. No one ever came out here. The townsfolk respected my space. Another knock, louder this time. I set the bottle down and grabbed the hunting knife I kept on the table. Old habits die hard. Slowly I moved to the door and opened it. Amber. Soaked. Shivering. Looking like she'd just walked through hell to get here. I tightened my grip on the knife. "Amber, what the hell?" She pushed past me into the cabin, dripping all over the floor. "I need to stay here." I blinked. "Excuse me." She turned, her face pale. "Just for tonight. Please." Something was wrong. Amber was always a little bold, a little too curious for her own good, but this was different. She looked scared. I shut the door, watching her closely. "What happened?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't want to talk about it." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "First Claire, now this?" But I wasn't heartless. I grabbed a towel from the shelf and tossed it to her. "Dry off. There's a blanket on the couch." She nodded, wrapping the towel around herself. I went back to the fire, taking another sip of whiskey, waiting. She didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat there, staring into the flames. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Someone was following me." I stilled. "Who?" "I don't know." Her fingers tightened around the towel. "I was walking home and I felt it, someone watching me. I turned and there was a man standing near the trees. When I walked faster, so did he." I set the bottle down. "Did you see his face?" She shook her head. It was too dark. Something cold ran down my spine. I might have been a loner, but I knew the people in this town. Most were decent. But some weren't. I stood up and grabbed my shotgun from the rack above the fireplace. Amber's eyes widened. What are you doing? I checked the chamber. Loaded. Making sure he didn't follow you here. Without another word, I stepped outside into the dark. The night was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that made your skin crawl. I stepped off the porch, shotgun in hand, scanning the tree line. The wind rustled the branches, but nothing moved. No footsteps. No shadowy figure waiting in the dark. Still, something felt off. I turned back toward the cabin, but then... a crunch. A footstep. Someone was out there. I raised the shotgun, my heart pounding steady, my breath slow. Come out, I called. I'm not in the mood for games. No answer. I took a step forward, the wet ground squelching under my boots. Last chance. The trees stayed still. Then, another crunch. But this time farther away. Fading. Whoever it was, they were leaving. I didn't lower the gun until the woods were completely silent again. After a few minutes, I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. Amber was still sitting by the fire, wrapped in the blanket. She looked up, her face pale. Did you see anyone? No, I said. But someone was out there. She shivered. Not from the cold this time. I knew it. I set the shotgun down, rubbing a hand over my face. Amber, who have you pissed off? She hesitated, chewing her lip. Then, finally, she whispered, I think it might be him. My stomach dropped. I didn't like the way she said that. Who's him? She hugged the blanket tighter. My ex. Of course. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my voice even. Start from the beginning. She swallowed hard. His name's Jason. We were together for 2 years. He was controlling. Jealous. I left him months ago, but he's been trying to find me ever since. I frowned. I thought your family lived here. They do. But I didn't tell him I was coming back. She clenched her fists. Or at least, I thought I didn't. A bad feeling settled in my gut. How bad is he? She looked up at me, eyes dark with something I recognized too well. Fear. Bad. The fire crackled between us, casting shadows on the walls. I sighed, leaning against the table. You should go to the sheriff. She laughed bitterly. And say what? That I think I saw someone? That my crazy ex might have found me? There's no proof. And even if there was, Jason's careful. He never leaves proof. I didn't like this. Not one bit. But one thing was clear, Amber wasn't safe. And whether I liked it or not, she was my problem now. I didn't sleep that night. Amber dozed off on the couch, curled up in the blanket, but I stayed awake, shotgun propped against my chair, staring at the door. Listening. Nothing. Just the wind against the trees. By morning the storm had passed, leaving behind damp earth and a thick fog that clung to the ground. Amber stirred as the first light crept through the windows, blinking up at me. You didn't sleep? She asked, voice groggy. No, I said simply. She sat up, rubbing her arms. I should go home. My parents will be worried. I didn't argue. If Jason was here, she didn't need to be wandering around alone. I'll take you, I said. She started to protest, but one look at my face shut that down. We rode into town in silence. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other near my knife, my eyes scanning the trees. But we made it to her parents' place without issue. A small, cozy house near the edge of town, smoke curling from the chimney. She hesitated before getting out. Thanks, she said. Stay inside, I told her. Lock the doors. She nodded and disappeared inside. I didn't stay. Didn't want to talk to her parents or explain why their daughter showed up at my place in the middle of the night. I just turned the truck around and headed home. But something wasn't right. As I pulled up to my cabin, I saw it immediately. Footprints. leading right up to my porch. My stomach tightened. I grabbed the shotgun and stepped out, eyes scanning the trees. Nothing moved. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. I took a slow breath and stepped onto the porch. The door was still locked. No sign of forced entry. But then I saw it. A single cigarette, still smoldering on the railing. Someone had been waiting. Watching. My grip tightened around the shotgun. Whoever they weren't done yet. I picked up the cigarette, still warm. That meant whoever had been here left only minutes ago. I scanned the trees, listening, but all I heard was the wind. Someone was watching me. Maybe Jason. Maybe someone else. Either way, I wasn't about to wait around for them to make the next move. I went inside, locked the door, and grabbed my revolver from the drawer. The shotgun was good for intimidation, but if this turned into something close, I needed something faster. Then I saw it. A note. Sitting right on my kitchen table. I knew I hadn't left anything there. I'd checked before leaving with Amber. My gut twisted as I reached for it. The paper was damp from the humidity, the handwriting jagged like it had been written in a hurry. Stay out of this. No name. No signature. Just those 4 words. I clenched my jaw. Jason. Had to be. Some coward had broken into my cabin to leave a message like this? No. That wasn't how this was going to go. I wasn't some helpless idiot who'd roll over just because some jealous ex wanted to play mind games. I stuffed the note in my pocket, checked my ammo, and walked back out onto the porch. If Jason wanted a warning, I'd give him one. I fired a single shot into the trees. The sound echoed through the woods, sending birds scattering into the sky. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle again. Then I spoke, my voice calm, steady. You want her? Come get her. I waited. No answer. Coward. I holstered the revolver and went inside. I didn't know when Jason would make his move, but when he did, I'd be ready. I didn't have to wait long. The next day I was in town picking up supplies, extra shells, batteries, some canned goods when I saw him. Jason. I didn't need an introduction. I just knew. He was leaning against a truck near the general store, smoking a cigarette, watching me. Tall, lean, with the kind of smug face that made you want to break it. Amber's him. I walked past without a word, but I could feel his eyes on me. I threw my things in the truck, ready to leave when he finally spoke. You must be the fisherman. I paused, gripping the door handle. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. And you must be the creep who left a note in my house. He grinned, taking a long drag of his cigarette. Just a friendly warning. I stepped closer, staring him down. You break into my cabin again and I'll give you a real warning. His smirk didn't waver, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, just for a second. A crack in the confidence. Then he chuckled. Amber's got you wrapped around her little finger already, huh? He flicked his cigarette onto the ground, crushing it under his boot. She's good at that. Always playing the victim, making guys think she needs saving. My fists clenched. I wasn't stupid. I knew there were 2 sides to every story. But I also knew what fear looked like. And last night Amber had been scared. Jason stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't know her like I do. She's a liar. She makes you think she's innocent, but she likes the attention. Likes making men fight over her. I stared at him, unblinking. That why you're here? Because you like fighting over her? His jaw tightened. He wasn't expecting that. She's mine, he said finally. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. Not anymore. He smirked. You think you can keep her safe? I know I can. For the first time his confidence wavered. Just a little. But then he stepped back, raising his hands. All right, man. Have it your way. He turned, heading toward his truck. But before he got in, he looked back over his shoulder, smirking. Don't say I didn't warn you. I didn't move until his truck disappeared down the road. Then, without thinking, I got into mine and drove straight to Amber's house. This wasn't over. Not even close. By the time I reached Amber's house, my gut was already telling me something was wrong. The front door was open. Just a crack. I killed the engine and stepped out, hand resting on my revolver. The house was quiet, too quiet. No voices. No movement. I pushed the door open slowly. Amber. Nothing. The living room was empty. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the table, still warm. The couch pillows were slightly off, like someone had gotten up in a hurry. Then I saw the back door. Wide open. A cold weight settled in my chest. I moved quickly, stepping outside into the yard. The grass was wet from the rain, but I saw them, footprints leading toward the trees. Small ones. Amber's. And bigger ones. Jason. I gritted my teeth and followed. The tracks led into the woods behind the house, winding through the trees. My pulse pounded steady as I gripped my revolver tighter, eyes scanning ahead. Then a sound. Muffled. I moved faster, boots crunching against the wet ground. And then I saw them. Amber was pinned against a tree, Jason gripping her wrist tight. His face was inches from hers, voice low, threatening. "You're not leaving me again." She struggled, fear in her eyes. "Let me go." I didn't wait. "Let her go." Jason froze. Turned his head slowly. His smirk was gone now. Amber's eyes snapped to me, wide with something between relief and panic. Jason scoffed, still holding her wrist. "You really think—" I didn't let him finish. I stepped forward and pressed the barrel of my revolver right to his temple. Jason stiffened. "Last chance," I said, voice cold. "Get your hands off her." His jaw clenched. For a second I thought he was stupid enough to try something. But then his fingers loosened and Amber yanked free, stumbling back. She ran straight to me, gripping my arm. He just showed up, I didn't—" I kept my eyes on Jason. "Go back to the house," I told her. She hesitated but nodded, hurrying away. Jason exhaled through his nose, rolling his shoulders. "Big man with a gun, huh?" I didn't answer. Just let the silence stretch between us. Then I lowered the gun. And punched him straight in the face. Jason stumbled back, blood trickling from his nose. He wiped it with the back of his hand, laughing bitterly. "Should have known you'd be that kind of guy." I took a step closer. "Listen to me and listen good." My voice was quiet, but every word was sharp as glass. "You come near Amber again, I won't stop at a warning shot." Jason looked at me, something unreadable in his eyes. Then, slowly, he smirked. "We'll see." I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to break his damn jaw. Instead, I turned and walked away. But I knew this wasn't over. Jason wasn't done. And now, I had to make sure Amber was ready for whatever came next. Amber didn't stop shaking the whole ride back to my cabin. She sat stiff in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around herself, staring out the window like Jason was still lurking in the trees. She hadn't said a word since we left. I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. "You're staying here tonight." She didn't argue. Just nodded. Inside, she hovered near the fire, rubbing her arms. I grabbed a dry hoodie from my shelf and tossed it to her. "Here." She caught it, mumbled a quiet, "Thanks," and pulled it on. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of whiskey and poured a small glass. "Drink this." She hesitated, but after a moment, she took it and downed it in one gulp. She coughed, eyes watering. "God, that's awful." "Yeah." I took a sip from my own glass and sat across from her. "Now tell me what happened." She let out a slow breath. "I was home alone. My parents went into town. I was reading when I heard something outside." Her hands clenched in the sleeves of the hoodie. "I thought it was just the wind, but then the back door opened. He was just there." My jaw tightened. He kept saying he wanted to talk. That he missed me. That I belonged to him. She swallowed hard. "I ran, but he caught me by the trees. Then you showed up." I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. "He's not going to stop." Amber looked up, eyes full of something between fear and exhaustion. I know. I drummed my fingers against the table, thinking. Jason wasn't just some angry ex. He was the kind of guy who wouldn't stop until he won. And that made him dangerous. We need to be smart, I said. First thing tomorrow you're calling the sheriff. She scoffed. And say what? That my ex tried to take me? He didn't hurt me. He'll lie his way out of it, like always. I knew she was right. Guys like Jason knew how to play the system. Restraining orders didn't mean much when the person you were trying to avoid didn't care. I rubbed a hand over my face. Then we do this my way. Amber hesitated. And what's your way? I looked her dead in the eye. We make sure he never comes near you again. She swallowed. And how do we do that? I didn't answer. Because I already knew the answer. Jason wasn't going to stop. Which meant I had to stop him. The plan was simple. Jason was a predator. He liked control. He liked thinking he had the upper hand. So the only way to stop him was to make him think he did. I spent the next day watching the town, waiting. Jason wasn't hard to find. He was hanging around the docks, smoking, talking to locals like he belonged here. He was trying to blend in, but I could tell he was watching. Waiting. So I gave him something to see. That afternoon, Amber went back home. Alone. At least that's what he'd think. I parked my truck down the road, hidden between the trees. From there I had a clear view of Amber's house. I told her to go inside, turn on the lights, make it look like she was settling in. Then we waited. Hours passed. The sun set. The street lights flickered on. Then, movement. A shadow slipped around the side of the house. I gripped my revolver, heart steady. Jason. He thought she was alone. Thought he could corner her, whisper more of his sick, possessive garbage. But this time she wasn't alone. This time I was waiting. I crept out of the truck, staying in the shadows. Jason moved toward the back door, slow, careful. I let him get close. Let him think he was winning. Then I stepped out of the dark. Looking for something? Jason froze. Slowly he turned. Saw the gun in my hand. Amber stepped onto the porch, holding her phone. "Sheriff's on his way," she said, voice firm. "You're done, Jason." For the first time I saw something real in his eyes. Not anger. Not smugness. Fear. He opened his mouth, probably to lie, to play the victim, but I took a step closer, cutting him off. "I told you," I said, voice cold. "Come near her again and you'd regret it." He looked between me and Amber, jaw tightening. Then, like the coward he was, he turned and ran. But he didn't get far. Red and blue lights flashed as the sheriff's truck came roaring down the road. Jason skidded to a stop, hands up. Sheriff Dawson stepped out, shotgun in hand. "Going somewhere, son?" Jason didn't answer. Just stood there, chest rising and falling fast. Amber let out a shaky breath. I glanced at her. "You okay?" She nodded. Yeah, I think I am." Jason was done. Or so I thought. Because as the sheriff cuffed him and led him to the truck, Jason turned his head, locking eyes with me. And he smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Like he knew something I didn't. And suddenly I wasn't so sure this was over. Jason was in cuffs. He was caught. It should have been over. But that smile stuck with me. Amber saw it too. She stood next to me, arms crossed, watching as the sheriff shoved Jason into the back of his truck. "Why is he smiling?" she whispered. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. And that pissed me off. Sheriff Dawson walked over, adjusting his belt. "We'll keep him overnight," he said. "Might not be much we can charge him with, but we'll see." Amber's face fell. "You can't just let him go." Dawson sighed. "Trust me, miss, I don't like this any more than you do. But unless you got proof he meant to hurt you, he'll walk." I clenched my jaw. "Then what?" Dawson looked at me, face unreadable. "Then you better be ready for him to come back." I watched as his truck disappeared down the road, taking Jason with it. The moment it was gone, Amber turned to me. "We have to do something. If they let him out." "I know," I said. "But what?" I had options. None of them legal. None of them clean. And something told me Jason knew that. That's why he smiled. Because this wasn't just about Amber. It was about me. Jason wanted to drag me down with him. Wanted me to cross a line I couldn't uncross. And if I wasn't careful, I just might. I turned to Amber. "Pack a bag." She blinked. "What?" "You're not staying here," I said. "Not until I know he's gone." She hesitated. "And what about you?" I stared down the road, my mind already working through the next steps. "I'll handle it." Amber didn't argue. She just nodded and went inside. I stayed on the porch, revolver heavy in my grip. Jason thought he was playing a game. He had no idea what kind of man he was playing with. One way or another, this was going to end. And I wasn't the one who'd lose.